Welcome, friends. Welcome to another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. I'm your host, Dr. David, the Cutting Edge Doc, and here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting-edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. I'm very excited about today's show. My special guest is a new friend that I've just recently made, named, I want to make sure I get the pronunciation of both names correct. Regan, is it Bauman or Bowman?
Bauman.
Bauman, Regan Bauman. Can I call you Regan?
Yes.
Okay, and you can call me Dr. David. And Regan is someone I recently met through her YouTube creations, and was so impressed with her intelligence and her love and her commitment to service at a very young age, early 20s. And those of you who've been following my show and my work for a while know that it's becoming an increasing priority of mine to connect with people in their 20s and early 30s that really get it, that really know what's going on and have, have some natural leadership qualities and have some common values. And so for me, Regan fits all of those criteria. And I want to introduce her to you, my audience today, and also get to know her a little bit better. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Regan. Usually what we do in these in-depth interviews is we take some time in the beginning for the viewers and the listeners to really bond with you, really get to know you, so that when we get into what you're up to in your work, people have that connection and people have that context. So maybe you could talk about your journey up to this point and maybe focus on what are some of the major influences on your life so that at a fairly young age, you have a really broad and deep understanding of so many things about yourself and about life that many people don't come into until much later in life, or maybe not in a given lifetime at all.
Thank you so much, Dr. David. That is, it's really great to be here. I'm really excited. I almost have to think like where to start on all of this. I mean, I think it really started in probably 2012. I guess that's when I could say I had that awakening sort of. I would have been 15. And it really started, I think, with more external events. I mean, as a kid, I've always been almost more attracted to like the spiritual side, the more mysterious side. And then in 2012, I kind of started realizing how corrupt a lot of things were. And it was about the state and about the government that made me start questioning everything. It really made me start questioning everything and trying to find solutions. And it seems looking for external solutions for so long and, coming across amazing things like agorism and the liberty movement and all of these strategies that I find very important, and I still do, but it started to sort of almost get to a deeper level when I realized that, in a sense, I mean, these things are important, but what's really important and what it comes down to is the internal healing and the internal turmoil that a lot of people have that causes them to either not care or, leave negativity, spread negativity around. So I think it's really important for people to start being aware of their internal state, because it is hard, and it seems like we are getting this energy is starting to start manifesting in new ways. And to even have, I mean, I think it is important. I think we need a balance between the internal and between the external and finding solutions. But it does start on the internal level, because if you are suffering really bad, it's hard to even reach out and help other people if you can't even help yourself.
Can I take you back a little bit more in your past?
Yeah, of course.
So with regard to growing up in your family of origin, were either of your parents what you would call now, looking back on it, pretty consciously awake, or no?
I would like, as much as I love and respect and I'm grateful for my parents, at that time I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, I wouldn't say they were super into the things that I am into, but I was an only child, so that kind of caused me to be super introverted, and I kind of had to be more independent and really focus on my inner state at a young age, which, you know, does tend to cause suffering in a sense at a young age when you're super aware of your own thoughts. But because of those experiences, I think it made me really reflective, which probably helped me be who I am today.
How old were you when you met your first, I don't want to say hero, but when you met your first person where you thought to yourself, wow, you know, I don't know what they've got going on, but they've got something going on that I want to know more about?
I would say it would have been probably my freshman year in high school, actually. I mean, a lot of my heroes are dead. They're authors or musicians or scientists from long past, but it was actually my first music teacher, because I love music. I'm a musician, and I was just so amazed at the way that this person, not only was he an amazing musician, but he was also very aware and very spiritually awakened. So it was like really kind of the first adult I've ever met in real life at that point, where I was just like, wow, like, this is so inspiring. I mean, it helped me know that I'm not crazy, because I kind of thought I was crazy, because, you know, at that time you're very ostracized for having different thoughts.
So was this person sort of meeting you where you were, or was this person more like stretching you?
I would say in a sense both, in the sense of at that time, like, just being so aware of a lot of the bad things going on in the government. And I mean, and it's so profound, because it seems like now, from at least my perspective, so many people are aware of a lot of this stuff, and it's not, so it's like it's okay to talk about how corrupt the government is, but, you know, 5 years ago it was insane. People would just ridicule you and go crazy. But that was like the kind of place where we would meet in probably on the same level and we could share our perspective on that. But as far as like the spiritual connection and the music, I felt very I looked up to him a lot in that sense.
I understand. So, you know, I know a lot of times it's very dicey when people start taking the blinders off and they start getting exposed to what's really going on the planet and how we've been duped. It's really easy to get so resentful or depressed that you become part of the problem, and that just plays right into the dark forces' hands. Mm-hmm. And so how did you keep your balance, you know, at such a young age, being exposed to all of this material that most people your age wouldn't have had the strength to be able to handle it in a way that empowered them? How were you able to be with all of that, excuse me, in a way where it inspired you rather than caved you in?
That's a good question, because it is hard, and that's something maybe I forget sometimes, is just, you know, when you really start to awaken to all this darkness, like, it is terrifying, it is scary, and you have to kind of get over that hurdle of, you know, that sort of depression that it causes when you have to, because I mean, humans just, we're so terrified of the unknown, and you have to get over that hurdle. And then at the other side, that's what makes you grow, and then you want to help and you want to be a part of it. But I think between, you know, music and art and expressing sort of that turmoil and just sort of this connection that I was so grateful to have at a young age with the divine, with the unknown, with God, with the universe, or whatever, you know, some people might want to call it, and being able to, I don't know, just sort of have faith and get through it, I guess you could say. And I've always been a problem solver. Like, I just like to solve problems, and I see these things, and that was frustrating because it took many years for me to really find some actual solutions that we can put into theory and practice. Like, I just remember for years just trying to, like, I mean, reading autobiographies of people like Martin Luther King Jr. in the past, just trying to understand how an individual can truly make an effect to start solving these issues. Because, like I said, I just wanted to start finding a way. I like to be innovative. I like to find solutions.
Are you comfortable talking in more detail about your experience when you were 15 and you had this big breaking open?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Please share with us. Was it spontaneous? Was it while you were meditating? Were you praying? Were you asking a question? Tell us about it.
It was actually sort of stumbling down the rabbit hole of the internet, I guess you could say. I just started because, like I said, like I've always been, especially like even younger, like music was my life, and starting to notice just in the music industry alone, just how vilely corrupt, like it really is. Just, it's not only corrupt, it's disgusting, like some of the stuff that goes on, and and I mean, that's just one industry, but then like I started to notice that same corruption in all kinds of things. And then when I did start to notice the government, it was just like so overwhelming, so dark. And I think in 2012 there was kind of, it was a significant year, I think, at least from my perspective, because there were so many people around me that were sort of starting to wake up. I mean, maybe not necessarily my peers, but I know even like on Facebook, there was sort of a movement where all these activists and like freedom seekers were like having these massive friend bombs. And there was like a lot of paranoia going on. That was kind of the time when people were like, oh my goodness, like FEMA camps. And I was kind of in that same boat. I was pretty paranoid because I didn't know what was going on. And then, it's really, really dark and it's really, really scary. And then as time goes on, everything is, I mean, in a sense, it's still, time goes on and, we're not in FEMA camps, not trying to, I mean, not that it's not a possibility in a sense, but things go on and you start to see that we have a lot more power than we realize.
But to take you back to that moment, that moment out of time back when you were 15, can you share more about that?
Yeah, it rocked my world. It was definitely sort of like an all at once. It was sort of like it was like, I feel like there was energy in motion for it for a while. But when I truly realized, just how messed up it was very scary. It was terrified and dark and depressing. And like, I almost just felt I guess, suicidal at that young age, just because it was like so heavy and tremendously scary. And it did rock my world because it was sort of like a moment when you realize that everything is wrong. And I think, and it's like, looking back now, I'm grateful because at that time, like, I unconsciously made the decision to basically like delete all that bad data, like just and it's a process. Like, I mean, it took years to just remove all that bad data, like all of the lies and all of the misconceptions about my reality that I just had been brought up thinking, whether it was about, in public school or in the government or in the mainstream media, just like learning to like wipe that all out and start being skeptical and questioning all of it. And then even creating my own content and starting to really, I guess, take hold of my reality, I guess you could say, get it out of the hands of the cultural engineers.
At that time, were you kind of all alone kind of thing, or did you have any kind of like-minded support system or anything like that, or were you just pretty much on your own?
I was the complete black sheep. I mean, my friends now I used to have, even my friends that I love, like they would just, I mean, again, we were only 15, so they just thought I was just crazy. They thought I was insane, like so much ridicule, like, and I just had to kind of take it, and I thought that it was going to be like that. And I mean, my family thought I was crazy, like everyone just really, like I was really all by myself in that
This
point.
is what I want to get at, because so many people are so under the thumb of social proof, of the herd instinct, of needing outside validation. What I'm trying to get at in these early questions is maybe you take it for granted because it's been you for so long. But what I'm trying to get at is how you connected to the strength that you needed to continue to have faith in yourself, to continue to be willing to be committed to honoring your awareness, even in the face of no agreement and even ridicule. Were you always in touch with that strength, or did it kind of emerge spontaneously in relation to kind of you finding your calling and all these things you were finding out?
I mean, I definitely think that at that time, a lot of my, like we were talking about, influences, whether it's Nikola Tesla or Martin Luther King Jr., or even I remember some specific quote from Gandhi about, when you know the truth, like, don't give in, like, don't, like, I don't know, I feel very strongly about that, about following the truth, and even now I wouldn't want to give in. And I suppose that maybe came from, I mean, when I was younger, when I was in grade school, I did have a phase where I kind of conformed, and I mean, and I'm glad I went through that phase, but then I mean, after doing that, I realized that wasn't me, and I think it was around then when I kind of, on a subconscious level, almost learned that's not going to get you anywhere. I mean, I feel like I've always had sort of atypical thinking processes, and that's always going to make you a black sheep. I mean, even now, like, even in a time when this stuff is a lot more acceptable to talk about, you know, the next curve, and then kind of what we're talking about with the spirituality and the higher forces, like stuff like that, like, I mean, even that is kind of sort of ostracizing now, but.
Okay, so the sense I'm getting is that you've always had a respect for, and a love and a passion for truth and for knowing truth. And that's carried you through the tough times.
It truly has. And just sort of taking strength from people in history, and from art, and from music, and from that deep power inside, I suppose, has kept it. Because I mean, it is hard at times, especially then. Like, I forget how much just opposition there was, like, among my own loved ones, like, just thinking I was crazy. And I mean, in a sense, it's almost not their fault. They're just concerned for my health, but they're just so, you know, part of it, that they reject the unknown. They think it's crazy.
Well, I really admire you. I know a lot of people, I call them closet light workers. And there are people that really are waking up, but they're so attached to their current external expression, their current relationships, their current jobs, their certain, all that kind of thing, that they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to think clearly about about the implications of what they're discovering, and to speak their truth. And so I really admire you for doing that. That's one of the things I've noticed in common about people that are able to stay the course over many, many decades on this path, is this love of truth. And that there are a lot of people that want truth, but the people that really want it, the people that are really on fire for truth, I think those are the people that really are able to stay on the path for their entire lifetime. So I really get a sense of that with you. So one of the things that I want to talk about is that, well, first of all, we probably should take a step back and say that one of the contexts in which I found out about you was your love for agorism, which is a subset of, I would say, the freedom movement, or the liberty movement, or the movement that acknowledges that you can't run over the individual, that everything that's good in this world, relationships, groups, organizations, uh, adventures, sexuality, everything that's good comes out of voluntary interactions among sovereign individuals, and that you just can't get past the fact, if you are an honest observer of existential human existence, you can't get past the fact that the unit of free will in our dimension is the individual. And so I want to give you a chance in a little bit to define for the viewers and the listeners what the central tenets of agorism are. And then I also want to give you a chance to talk about and respond to something that I've noticed over decades of observing people who tend to be attracted to voluntarism, is many of them are doing it partially because of their love for, they sense there's some truth there, but part of it is they're kind of hiding out in a conceptual framework, and they're avoiding their emotions, they're avoiding their spirituality, they're avoiding their inner life. Like, are you familiar with Ayn Rand?
Yeah.
Okay, and it, you know, on one hand, she was an amazing philosopher, but on the other hand, she had this enormous blind spot when it came to psychology and spirituality, and it killed her basically, and it kept her literature from being taken more seriously by a lot of intelligent people. And so when you talk about agorism and the freedom movement and your experience of that, I'd like you to weave in what it's been like for you as a person that is in touch with your inner life, with your spirituality, with your emotions, with your feminine energy. What it's been like for you to attempt to integrate and contribute to the whole freedom, voluntarist, agorism movement.
It's, like you said, it's so very consistent with the individual, and I think that's why I love it so much, because like I was saying earlier, it's, for so many years I just was seeking solutions, and it's so hard. I mean, it's such a complex problem when you look at such like massive like physical structures, whether it be economic structures or political structures, and finding agorism was really liberating in that sense for me, because it takes it back to the individual. And not only, it's not even just a theory, because I mean, even just finding the libertarian and the anarchist theory was very amazing and liberating for me, but finding agorism, which is truly the practice, was amazing. So agorism is sort of, it's described as counter economics. It's using the underground economy and using economics as a strategy for freedom. And Ludwig von Mises defined economics as the sum of all human actions. So I mean, even what we're doing right now, in a sense, is an economic activity when you think of it. And it's interesting to sort of blend the spiritual and the economical like that. Trying to think of where to slice into the pie. That's a really good question here.
Maybe we could start with defining our terms. That's always a good place to start. Well, there's people that are going to be watching this and listening to this that don't know what the liberty movement is. They don't know what voluntarism is. They don't know what agorism is. So we probably, if we can start there, and then we can use that as a clear container to then bring in the other elements of my question.
Okay. So voluntarism, that's the simple philosophy that all human interactions should be voluntary, it should be peaceful, that the use of force and violence is wrong, no matter who's doing it, whether it's your neighbor or your government. And I feel very strongly about that. I don't think that the government should have this supreme authority that just allows it to kill people and steal from people and patronize people. So how do you apply that? It was agorism, which is basically free market means to a free market ends. And so it's an example would even just be, using cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, or growing vegetables and trading them with your neighbor, whether it be for money or for maybe some fruit, or any sort of small scale economic actions like that to try to siphon power away from the state and put it into this sort of underground economy of peaceful interactions. And it sounds like it's something sort of abstract, but it's really not. It's really simple, and it's really something that anyone can participate in. Just little bits help. And I mean, I think that's why the government, you know, cracks down so hard on even small acts of commerce. I mean, there's been cases of little girls' lemonade stands having to be shut down because they don't have a business license. Like, I mean, and they, at some level, they recognize that even small acts of commerce like that over time by many individuals has a big effect on the economy. And everybody has economic power, whereas most people don't have any political power at all. And we can use our economic power. It's a huge force that we all have. We can use that to start empowering ourselves and gaining freedom. So that's kind of what agorism is. It's this counter-economics idea of this strategy. It's educating yourself. It's trying to be more self-sustainable and independent. It's using alternative currencies, because the monetary system is a huge pillar of how they keep their power and keep us in debt.
So could you talk about your experience of being a person that is very in touch with your inner world and your emotions? What it's been like for you to become part of a movement that has historically tended to discount emotions and spirituality, and what kind of headway do you think is being made in terms of expanding the realization of unity in that community?
I definitely have to almost have a shout out real quick to the Conscious Resistance Network, the platform I've been using, founded by Derek Bros, because I really admire his work, because he seems like the first one to really start doing that, to start to realize, you know, that huge gaping void between spirituality and freedom in the physical world, which is so strange, but it's definitely there. You're definitely right. So sort of realizing like his work was also very influential to me, and like putting it out there. And it seems now is almost the best time to start putting this message out there, because even though it's been so almost violently opposed, I mean, you have either people who are very sort of spiritual or into consciousness, and they don't want anything to do with, they don't really want to even think about trying to find external solutions in the world. They more want to think about the spiritual realm. And then on the other side, you have people who really want to put out these peaceful solutions in the physical world, but they don't want to think about the spiritual. So it's like we have to bring these things together. And I think that now there is a movement starting to come out of the works. And it was almost confirmed by my last video when I was talking about this stuff, because I was a little bit skeptical. Not that I am afraid to talk about it, but I just I'm trying to express it in a way that won't scare people away, so they can really start to really think about it. And so I put a video, not even so much talking about agorism, because I normally do talk a lot about different strategies such as agorism, but more about the psychological and the spiritual. And I put it out there, and I got a lot of really good feedback. I mean, a lot of really awesome people have reached out to me from that video, and I took that as a really awesome sign, because I mean, this is my biggest passion. I mean, the only reason I think I'm so passionate about agorism and about voluntarism and about freedom and liberty in our economy is because I am passionate about the spiritual and the consciousness, and I want humans to expand, because that's the biggest tragedy of the government, is that it's probably the biggest physical force that is keeping humans down right now, besides, of course, their own internal selves, which it comes down to. But nonetheless, it's really interesting. I think we're starting to see sort of that come up in people. People are sort of having to face themselves. And I mean, they kind of have to. They don't really have any other choice besides wreaking havoc.
Does your worldview, in terms of your cosmology, your sense of of the game that's going on here on the planet. In your own reality, how far out does it go? Like, are you tuned into extraplanetary factors that are influencing the Earth level Illuminati? Or is that something that's not in your world?
Like, I'm sorry, could you maybe like elaborate on that a little bit?
Like, do you see the drama that's going on the planet right now that's playing out between the light and the dark? Do you see it as an isolated event, or do you see it as part of something that's going on with our entire solar system, our entire sector of the galaxy?
I definitely could see the bigger picture, I guess you could say. And that's another reason why it's, I mean, because it's in a sense, like even the bad things, like without bad, there would be nothing good. And if we didn't have, these crazy psychopaths dominating the world, then I know I wouldn't have had to wake up. I wouldn't have had to have this suffering that would lead me here. I wouldn't have had to think about innovative solutions using like the free market. So it is, in a sense, that is sort of the good spin on it, even though of course nobody wants to suffer, nobody wants to see that. But
right.
It's like, it's crazy to me, especially learning more about psychology lately, is just like how much people, like especially with the mainstream media, the way that they just feed people all this negative content, and people just eat it up, and they create that reality. It's like they're literally, those people at the top, are, whether they are intentionally doing this or not, I think they are probably, but they're just using people's energy almost to create this kind of world that they want. And that's why it's so important for people to just unplug from this content and start producing their own and start, creating.
Are you familiar with the Law of One material?
I've never heard of that, actually.
You might be interested in checking it out. There was a very high level consciousness that came through, I think it was a physicist, I'm not sure, back in the latter part of the 20th century. And there's this material called the Law of One material. And the basic idea is that it's validating what you're saying, that the dark team on the planet that's very focused on total domination and control, that they're playing their part in a bigger play that is bringing out latent desires and talents and abilities in us, in the light workers, that would have been highly unlikely to happen anyway. And that they're part of the oneness. They just don't know they're part of the oneness. But the dark side is part of the oneness that is playing their part in a play, and that there's going to become a time where the frequencies on planet Earth are such that that light-dark game won't be necessary anymore on this planet, or this version of the planet that you and I are in. So it's a way of recontextualizing the darkness in a way where you can see the darkness and not be duped by the darkness, but you don't close down your own connection to the light by being judgmental. So it's a very cool philosophy, or a very cool cosmology. And a lot of people that are making a difference today in a good way have been really influenced by the Law of One material. So I just wanted to commend that for your sharp mind investigation.
That's really interesting. I've never actually heard of that, but it's almost something that I've sort of played around with though, like before, because I seem to come back to that. I mean, it's been a while. I've accepted that negativity is necessary, and then lately it's like, not only is it necessary, but I almost want to embrace it. Like, we need it. In the words of Carl Jung, like there's no growing of consciousness without pain and suffering.
In my view is that it's necessary until it isn't. You can learn through pain, or you can learn through wisdom.
Yeah.
There's an old spiritual saying, if you listen to the whispers, you don't have to hear the screams.
Yeah, that's a very good saying.
So given the prevailing level of consciousness of humanity, it's totally appropriate that we're learning through these high contrast uh, light dark games like Star Wars. But you know, there's that scene in one of the Star Wars movies where Darth Vader takes off his mask. I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah, yeah.
And his head is full of light. Underneath the dark mask, that the role that he's playing, when he's getting toward the end, he takes off his mask and you see the light that was really there all the time, that was being kind of titrated or channeled or filtered through the dark mask. And, you know, to me, that's very a good allegory of
Yeah.
what is really going on. And you know, when you understand that viewpoint from the law of one, about how the dark team is making the light team stronger, it helps me to understand when Jesus said to love your enemy. It starts to make more sense to me what he might have been pointing at there. And it's a way of being with cruelty or darkness in a way where we don't become part of the darkness by getting overly hateful or judgmental, but at the same time we can be very firm and very, very clear. So for me, it's been for me to try on for size the law of one worldview, combined with all the other work that I've done, both personally and spiritually, and with my physical body and what I've learned in the world. That combination has been very powerful for me, and maybe you'll resonate with it, and maybe you'll be able to take that idea into some places that it otherwise might not go.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I'm sort of just absorbing all of that. It's really true.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. You talked about how important it is to integrate the inner and the outer. And, you know, one of the areas where I feel myself and my generation has a lot to learn from you and your generation is in the area of strategy and tactics. Because when we were growing up, our experience of time and space was very different. We didn't have computers. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media. We didn't have any of that. I mean, it was a totally different pace and a totally different sense of what's possible in terms of the viral dissemination of ideas and how quickly you can establish yourself and build a brand. It was like there was not this compression of time and space as there is now. And so our brains of my generation, we're not wired the way yours is wired. And so I'm trying to learn as much as I can from your generation about how to take the kind of level of consciousness that we're talking about and translate it into what the Buddhists would call skillful means, to translate it into strategies and tactics that take advantage of the energies and the technologies that are available now. And so I'd like to invite you to talk about some of the structures and strategies and tactics that you found the most exciting in terms of substantiating this philosophy in daily living. Like I was listening yesterday to the latest Derek Rose. What's his last name? What's Derek's last name?
Bros.
Rose is a video where he talks about having won his court case and the gag order being lifted and talking about what he was doing. And it's obvious to me that he's very tuned in at this level of strategy and tactics. and I can understand why you'd have that affinity. Um, I know it. I don't know if it was his idea or your idea. Talked about are talked about what they called freedom groups or
Yeah, freedom cells.
freedom cells. Maybe you could talk about freedom cells, what those are, and any other maybe structures or ideas at the strategic and tactical level that you're really jazzed about.
Yes, absolutely. And sort of a main theme of a lot of these things are actually decentralization, the decentralization of power. Because when you have the centralization of so much power from these elitists or the government or whatever group, that's when they can really have a lot of power when they abuse it. But when we can really decentralize this power, which economics is a really good strategy of how to do that, you empower the individual, and then this great force, you siphon power away from them. So it's kind of like a win-win in that sense. And that's kind of the strategy, because that's the thing is like, what's holding up this evil, what's holding up this state? It's not, people make projections onto it like it's this, big, powerful thing, but really it's just a group of agreements by individuals. It's just a bunch of individuals acting and agreeing, or even if it's just being complacent to this force. So it's kind of, on a spiritual and physical level, getting people to unplug from it, getting people away from the state and starting to use their economic power instead of funding this, this state economy, to start creating our own economy. Because I think there's really, I think there's about 4 options we have when it comes to trying to work towards physical solutions. And it's 1, do nothing, obviously not effective. 2, try to use the government, try to vote, try to use campaigning and protesting. And then I don't think that's effective at all either. Or we can try to tear the system down. That's the 3rd option, using violence and rioting, and I don't think that's the option either. So the 4th solution that I think is the most pragmatic is building a new system that's so good and so peaceful and so efficient that the old one, the current one, just becomes obsolete. It becomes irrelevant. It collapses because it's just, there's not enough power in it. And I think that's the best strategy we really can have at this time, because obviously the government has a lot of power, it has a lot of weapons and whatnot. But if we start to sort of starve it of its funds and of its energy that we give to it, and start to not only starve it of that, but start to creatively and productively start to build something else, start to build our own economy, start to build our own solutions and alternatives to the state, then we're going to see something really beautiful. And that's kind of like the big theme of agorism. And freedom cells, that's such an amazing idea. That's part of the decentralization process, part of the getting off of the government and being more self-sustainable. It's a group of people, Derek says usually, 8, more or less, and getting in your community and using your own skills, your own talents, or your own, projects to sort of empower yourself and empower the people around you and start building your community. It really is about building your own community, because if something does happen, if shit were to hit the fan and, something happens with the government, you're going to want a community that is more independent and can do stuff. So that's kind of what that is about.
I see. What, at the level of specifics, like in your own life, what, at a tactical level, what are you doing to design your life right now in an optimal way for you?
So I'm self-studying using books, and there's actually a bunch of free online college classes you can get just free. You may not get the college credit, but you get the experience and the knowledge. So I think I consider that agorism. I'm educating myself to be a computer programmer, and I'm really interested in technology and all that. And so that's something I do every single day. I cut hair, sometimes for Bitcoin, which using cryptocurrency is really important because, again, their monetary system, that's one of the main kind of pillars of their control. And I think there's a lot of room for cryptocurrency. I think that's an amazing innovation that we have. So I try to use Bitcoin as much as possible. I try not to use Federal Reserve debt notes, or any form of currency, really, whether it's gold or, if you can use a bartering system, that's cool too. And I do have like a little garden I like to grow. That's kind of like a self-sustainable strategy, growing your own food. It's like growing your own power. And of course I make videos and I try to spread ideas and spread, just spread inspiration really again. And then this is kind of where it starts to play into the spiritual thing, the spiritual role, because you seem to leave more, you leave more of an effect on people just by like leading by example, and like the way you live your life and the way you carry yourself on a subconscious level. You will kind of shake people almost more than you could try to convince people consciously, because most people have to learn about things in a roundabout way before they really understand, especially their own demons. It's really hard for people to face that in themselves.
Do you live alone? Do you have roommates? Are you in a committed relationship? How do you do your personal life right now?
Well, I actually currently live with my mom.
Uh-huh.
But I do have and I was talking about this in one of my other videos. I've managed to build a community of fellow agorists, fellow anarchists, and it wasn't necessarily through the theory of it initially, but it was through the practice, using the free market and inspiring people, even if it's just little side hustles, to just start little entrepreneurships, whether it, like out of your own passions, like music or crafts or
So
whatever
what did you do?
Like I said, I cut hair. I actually, I do hair around here, and then that's how I make money. I work for my friend's company who actually pays in Bitcoin, so that's really cool. It's yet to be launched. It's Bad Mirror TV. It's going to be really cool. That's going to be another huge step in decentralizing media, which is really important. I think the market is really kind of ripe for that right now. And meditation, I would consider that almost an act of civil disobedience, like getting into yourself, rejecting, like understanding that because people seem to think that the government is the supreme authority, that they subconsciously think the government is God at this point. It's really astounding to me. But remembering that there's way more out there than that. And really any sort of side hustle, I have different things that I like to create and sell, or I try to like support other local agorists or even small businesses in my community. I try to shop there and really vote with my dollar, because I don't think voting in the government is effective at all. Some people might argue against that, but I think it's completely futile. But voting with your dollar and voting with your energy, your real economic power, that is when you even as an individual, like you really can have a say in what's going on in your society.
In terms of creating this community around you, did that just happen out of just living your life naturally, or were you consciously intending to cultivate that type of community, and did you do anything special?
I would definitely say I would consciously want to create that community, because like I said before, just 5 short years ago, it's so weird to think about how ostracized I was for these kinds of beliefs. And I feel like it's so important to help people around you to like, hold on, I'll go back to that thought. But it was so ostracized, but now it seems it's almost very contagious when people see that freedom and see the practice, not just the theory, but they see how you live your life. And so I guess the answer would be both. Like, it's something I consciously want to manifest and try to, share with people. I don't want to force anything down people's throats or anything, but, just share this idea with people. It's a simple philosophy that we don't need to be violent in our transactions with other individuals. And, when people can really understand it and they can really see it, then people want to participate in it. A lot of people, they want to influence the world they live in, and they want to help. They don't really understand the means. And I think that's kind of where we really are butting heads right now, as people are fighting about what to do in the government. And, all of these crazy hoops trying to jump through all these things, when really we have similar means. We want to live in a peaceful and efficient world. We can't agree on the means, and we get really caught up in that.
It sounds like you've been really influenced by the ideas, I don't know if consciously or unconsciously, by Bucky Fuller. Are you familiar with Buckminster Fuller?
A little bit. I actually should do some more research, but I haven't read anything by him.
He's very difficult to read, very difficult to read, but basically he was one of the most prolific inventors of the 20th century. And he invented the geodesic dome and many, many, many other things, hundreds and hundreds of patents. And he was the one that basically said, instead of trying to argue with people and trying to change their mind that way, create or produce something that works better, and people will eventually find it.
Yes.
And I think that's very much, whether you consciously were doing it or not, I feel like you're following in that genre very much.
I would agree 100%. That's something I've sort of been like starting to realize is, everyone's over here arguing and just getting nowhere. And I mean, especially in this day and age, people don't even want to have a respectable argument. Like if you don't agree with me, like I hate you. Like that's kind of how they act. So why do we, and even then, like it's so hard to just, compare theories. But when you actually do create something and you build something, like instead of putting your energy into like this, ongoing battle that is usually fruitless, you're actually creating something with that energy, and then you're going to have a model for people to actually witness. And then again, like when they see that in practice, then they're going to, be more open to understanding you.
Yeah. And it's more psychologically, it's easier to confront the fact that most of the systems that make up the fabric of our institution are breaking down. It's a lot easier to confront that if you've got some other place to go that's working better. So much easier. Like I heard a statistic within the last few days that the total world debt right now to basically the bankers is $217 trillion. That's way more than just the GNP, the GNP for the whole world for a year, way over that. So, and then with the whole fractional banking system and the way that money is put into circulation with interest, it's mathematically impossible to ever pay off the debt. And so it's psychologically challenging for many people to say that this is just eternally broken. The emperor has no clothes. It's a lot easier to confront that and to say that if you have an idea in your mind about what you might do instead, and that there are other people that are considering doing that and actually doing that. Like I've been a spiritual guide for people for many decades now. And one of the things I've discovered is that people will not let go of ego-based consciousness unless they have faith and some sense that there's something else. So it's that same idea of substitution. The way the mind works, it won't let go of something even if it's killing you, because to that part of the mind, it's better than nothing, because nothing would be annihilation in that logic system. And so to have a living example of an alternative, and especially a group of people that are living that alternative, and then to be able to think clearly about all of this, that combination is extremely powerful. And so I want to acknowledge you for what you're doing. I feel like a lot of what you're doing, you're just doing it because you have a good connection to the main socket. And maybe I'm giving you some perspective on what you're naturally doing that will make it easier for you to communicate with more people, and maybe give you some insight too into your own journey. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is, are you familiar with Mark Passio?
No, I'm not actually.
He's an interesting guy. You might check him out, Markpassio. He's an amazing guy. He was actually involved for 10 years on the dark side. He was actually involved in the Church of Satan. And he was one of the few people that got out of it. One of the few people that actually realized what he was doing and realized that it was inconsistent with his deeper values, and then actually came over to the Light team. And he has many, many powerful videos and audios you can access on YouTube. And one of the things he's talked really brilliantly about has been the dark team's efforts to destroy healthy male and female identity and functioning and sexuality and relationships. And he's talked a lot about the difference between the original feminist movement, which was designed to bring about justice and equal pay and things like that, and kind of the current version of the feminist movement, which is more of a neo-Nazi, man-hating kind of situation. And he goes into great depth about that. It's one of the pillars of the strategy of the dark side in terms of trying to get control of people and of this planet, has been to create this rift in sexual identity, sexual functioning, and the relationship between the sexes. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, either in your own life or in terms of your awareness about the agorist movement and voluntarism, how much conscious discussion is there about this topic?
About you mean like the dark factors that play?
The male-female game that's going on the planet, and the role and the role of the statists, if you will, from your point of view, that want to weaken individuals, that want to weaken the family unit, that want to weaken the healthy sexual relationships. How much consciousness is there about that being part of the entire oppressive game that's going on the planet right now? And is that something you have consciously tuned into? And is that something that you bring into your work and into your conversations with people?
Yeah, I would definitely say that is a pretty big topic among anarchists, even though it may not be a sole function in a sense, because it's a lot, I mean, that's definitely more of a social thing. But there's definitely a lot of awareness of that, because it's almost unavoidable at this point with people. Basically, when it comes down to people really trying to end free speech, people are really trying to end free speech in that area and try to say, like, you know, like, that hurts my feelings, so you can't say that, or like, you don't like believe that there's a million different genders, so like you're a bigot and you should like be punished. Well, there's a lot of that insanity that against sort of free expression and free speech, and I do see a lot of discussion about that. But you know, perhaps there should be more, because there definitely is an agenda, and a lot of these college kids, these like because it's like, that's a very leftist sort of idea, and you know, leftists are probably like almost one of our biggest opponent. I don't know if well, I mean, I guess I could say opponent, the opponent of liberty, of freedom, because they want that big government. They want that sort of collectivism among everybody. And it's definitely it is a huge issue that I think is discussed.
I was just wondering, in terms of trying to get a read on the level of consciousness of the current agorist voluntarist movement, I was really impressed that at a major conference, Mark Passio did a 2-part presentation on this topic about the relationship between the sexes and sexuality, because I think it's something that's causing a lot of suffering for a lot of people, and it's kind of verboten in society to talk about it. And, you know, it's so obvious if you take off the blinders. It's so obvious that men and women are different. Mm-hmm. Their anatomy is different. Their psychology has differences, their brains have differences, even at the anatomical level. Like, for example, women have more connections between the left and the right brain than men do. And so this confusion of, on one hand, there's equality in the sense that men are precious, women are precious, they're equally valuable, but they're not the same.
Right.
And I think one of the strategies of the statists is to confuse equality with sameness.
Yes.
And I think that is a big trap in general, but I think that that trap and the dysfunctionality and the pain and the suffering that it causes human beings if they buy into it is demonstrated more clearly in male-female relationships than in any other human area. And so I think it is a wonderful object lesson for people. And it's also a wonderful way to reach people emotionally, because it's, for many people, it's so important to them to have, they're wanting to have a satisfying romantic relationship. And they're finding it very, very difficult to integrate their highest values with their romantic and sexual life. And they don't have the clarity of thought to look at it and understand what are the forces at play. And obviously, some of the forces at play are what we're talking about, this confusion of ideas, of equality and sameness, this whole thing about the transgender bathrooms and trying to get little children to choose their gender. I mean, all of this is part of this whole thing. And then you've got the whole physical end of it, where just physically people can't function as well because of all the plastics in the environment that screw up our hormones, and the fact that they're not getting good fats and oils in their diet. They're not getting the minerals they need from the topsoil. So all these things, the toxicity levels, so all these things physically and metaphysically are conspiring to make it really challenging to have deeply satisfying, resonant male-female relationships. And I was wondering if that is a intelligent topic of conversation in the circles you travel in, and whether it is or it isn't. Is that something you've thought much about? Is that something you would like to have more conversation about among the people in your world?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I mean, it's definitely something I've thought about, and it is something that comes up a lot. And a lot of times, again, because of how it tries to violate, free speech and the more like economic and political effects of it. But to go to the more spiritual and psychological side, I think it is really important. And you're more bringing that to my attention than I really realized, because there is like this just devastating sort of linguistic error between people. I mean, people, they want equality, like they think that sounds good, like that I mean, it does sound good in a sense, like when you hear equality, like, I mean, in a sense, yeah, we should have equal rights and, in that way, but people seem to like confuse equality with freedom, and then that's when it's really devastating, because only when people have freedom do they have equality of rights. But if you just try to say everything is equal, make everybody the same, have like this central planning, then it's just going to go crazy. It's just going to go haywire. It's just not how nature works.
I mean,
that is something.
I know men that are afraid, and they actually keep their mouth shut. They're afraid at work, like they're afraid to tell a female coworker how beautiful they look today.
Wow.
Because they're afraid of being hit with sexual harassment for saying that. So that's how insane. It's literally come to that.
That's true. I mean, and I think maybe I'm just not so exposed to it right now because I live in a more sort of conservative area. But when I do talk to friends who live in, say, New York City or Seattle, you know, they do talk about how progressive it is, like how crazy it is with just a compliment or like holding open a door, like can turn into something like some just sort of insane psychosis.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the language has become so perverted. I mean, I don't even use terms anymore like the left or progressive, because to me, the left and the progressives have become the new fascists.
Yeah, and
So
it's ironic that they're so anti.
look at what happened when Milo tried to speak at Berkeley a few months ago. Were you aware of that?
I heard a little bit about that.
Yeah, basically they erupted in violence and threats of violence to the point where he had to cancel, and there was damage done to property. And oh, for example, Alex Jones went to Seattle on a working vacation this last week, and he wanted to expose the leftist insanity and cognitive dissonance. And so he went out on the street corner and tried to engage a lot of these people in an intelligent conversation. And they couldn't do it. It devolved into basically non-logical, prejudicial, name-calling. He was exposing this. And in these progressive areas, like San Francisco and Seattle and places like that, it's become so PC that literally these people are going nuts, and the soul is being suffocated at such a extreme level. And you can see these people, these yuppies, you can see they have a lot of money, but you can see that they're suffering at just about every conceivable level. And it's going to be a hard fall for a lot of people. As someone who grew up as a liberal myself, someone who grew up having a passion for social justice, one of the things that's been very difficult for many of the baby boomers that identified with the left is to see the infiltration of the left by the dark to the point where it's now evil. It's now become an evil thing. And so I've just pretty much given up these whole labels of left and right. And I prefer to look at it more from the point of view of educating people to see if we can agree on the fact that individuals are the basic unit of freedom of free will in this world, and that it's very difficult to point to any successful social experiments that did violence to human free will, and that if we can, unless someone is totally delusional, it's pretty easy for them to eventually see that all of the experiments to try to force someone's will onto another adult in the long run never works. It's not that hard to prove that. And I'm finding that strategically, that's a much better initial point of agreement to build on than trying to use these terms that, at least historically in my lifetime, they become so disjointed that they've lost their meaning.
Yeah, I would definitely agree in with that, because even with like the word libertarian or voluntarist or anarchist, sometimes it's when you're really trying to hone in on sort of spreading freedom to people, sometimes you lose them just with those words, just with that linguistic vocabulary. But when you just try to remind people, like, you know, like, do you think you're self-owned? Do you think you're self-governed? Like, do you think that, like, in that kind of way? Because I mean, most people will say that they want to be self-owned and that they want to be the one responsible for their actions and not not the state. But sometimes when you throw out those labels, it does, people have like preconceived like attachments to them. It makes the communication muddy.
Yeah, and also there's psychological forces involved too. There's a
Mm-hmm.
tremendous amount of projection of unfinished business and unfinished trauma that people have with their mother and father and other authority figures that they were young, that they end up projecting onto the government and other authority figures. And so at a subconscious level, they need the government because they're projecting something that they're disowning. And that's where the psycho-spiritual element of all of this comes in. In my experience, you can't just limit it to external strategies and tactics and logic. You have to do the inner work because the subconscious is working 24/7. And if you are avoiding your own shadow work, there's no amount of strategies and tactics and logical arguments that will substitute for the lack of doing your own deep, deep inner healing. And I'm excited about meeting you and getting a sense of your commitment. And of course, you know, you're in your early 20s, so you're like even far away from full adulthood in terms of astrologically and stuff. So, you know, I know these next 8 or 9 years for you are just going to be huge. But I see wonderful qualities in you and a foundation that's very, very strong and very, very solid. And I think as you mature in this lifetime, just your unfoldment in time, your normal progressions, I think you'll tap more and more into the depth of the soul knowledge that you have, that runs very deep and that you already have some sense of. I think it's going to expand a lot for you over the next decade especially. And I'm glad our paths have crossed. And if there's anything I can do for you, I really appreciate it. And I would strongly recommend checking out the Law of One material and also checking out the work of Mark Passio. And don't try to read Buckminster Fuller unless you're a masochist. It's impossible. But there have been some good books written that try to take the essence of what he was saying and to put it into plain English. Some really good stuff. And I think if I could point you even just in those 3 areas for now,
Yes.
I think it will help you. And through helping you, I think it will help a lot of other people. I would like to turn it over to you to close us out, to say anything that you would like to say in closing, anything we didn't get a chance to talk about, anything you'd like to express, and then make sure people know what your best contact information for people to plug into you and your work. And then let me know when you're done, and then I'll close out the show.
Okay, sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for all of those wonderful compliments. And you've definitely brought a lot of things to my attention that I'm going to have to sort of ponder on. And I'm really excited to look into these things. But again, sort of going back to the internal side of things, like, I mean, it's the external solutions are so important, but they will come, I feel, with the internal healing. And there's just so many people just, you know, that don't want to make that commitment to healing themselves, because it is the hardest thing and it is scary. And, you know, I don't think there's any external obstacle that would even nearly compare to facing your own psychological demons. But it really truly is the most noble and important thing that we can do in ourselves, and being mindful in other people in these upcoming times. As, you know, consciousness is sort of expanding in different directions with all the different technology and stuff. We need to be mindful when we see people exhibiting this wild behavior. You know, we should deal with this intelligently and with awareness and compassion, rather than just being reactive to it. Especially, you know, when, just like we were talking about with some of the more social things, because those are more like psychological than economical in a sense. Like the gender issue, like seeing people's, you know, internal turmoils and demons start to come out and manifest, and just wild ways. We need to be intelligent in how we deal with that. So it's kind of sort of an example of what I would like to leave off with the internal and the external healing. But again, thank you so much, and I hope we can do this again sometime. I've really enjoyed being on your show and talking to you, and if you ever need anything from me as well, I would love to help as well.
Thank you. Could you give out your contact information?
Yes, the best way to see my work or to contact me, I would recommend going to my blog. It's etherealself.wordpress.com. Maybe you can put a link.
Could you say that a lot slower and then spell it?
Yeah, Ethereal Self. So it's AETHEREALSELF, self. Maybe you could have a link, and it's at WordPress. I know it sounds kind of confusing, so hopefully maybe you can put a link in the description or something. And that has my email, that has some other platforms that you could reach me on, my YouTube.
If people want to look you up directly on YouTube, would they just look up your name?
Yeah, I would type in Regan Keeley, REGANKEELY. I have my own YouTube channel, and then a lot of my work I put on the Conscious Resistance Network, so you can also look there as well.
Do you want to take a minute and just say what that is, what the Conscious Resistance Network is? Because you mentioned it a couple of times, and I can tell it's something that you have really good feelings about. Yeah,
the Conscious Resistance Network is a platform that was actually founded by Derek Brose. We talked a little bit about him earlier, and it's this network where he created years ago, trying to, build that bridge between the spirituality and the personal development and the consciousness, and between anarchy and libertarianism.
Great. Well, if that group ever has a conference, I would be willing to speak at that conference and share my perspective as someone who's been on the path for a while and has been a holistic doctor for 30 years and has been a deep student of a lot of these things. I'd be happy to contribute.
That's wonderful. I definitely think there'll be some opportunities. I know Derek and the Free Thinker House in Houston, they like to have events, and they like to travel around and speak and try to spread solutions on a community level. So that definitely is a possibility in the future.
All right, well, let's stay in touch. Thank you so much, Regan. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. And on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that have been doing cutting-edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. And our special guest today, I want to make sure I get it right, has been Regan Bauman. And we've been talking about liberty, voluntarism, agorism, the connection between inner freedom and outer freedom, the connection between spirituality and psychology and economics and social action. And really enjoyed today's show. And with that, we'll close with love and peace. Bye for now.